listeners, before we get into today's episode, Dr. G and I would just like to mention that we will once again be presenting at the podcast event of the year, Intelligent Speech. In 2025, this event will be taking place on February 8th, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The tickets are $30 and are available at intelligentspeechonline.com. This year's topic is deception, so we will be hearing about all sorts of fake history and historical deception. Seems timely. Last year, we had a blast talking about Augustus's failed attempts to secure an heir, and we're looking forward to presenting on something similarly imperial and scandalous this year. We hope that you can join us and all your other favourite podcasters at Intelligent Speech. And now, on with the episode. Welcome to the Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals, the love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr. Rad.
And I'm Dr. G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different authors from the ancient past and comparing their stories.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of The Partial Historians. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Rad.
And I am Dr. G, and I'm super excited to be here because we're about to talk about 397 BCE.
Indeed, we are, Dr. G, as we trace the story of Rome from the founding of the city. But before we get to 397, can we please quickly recap what happened in 398?
Look, there was some sort of lake. It rose up. I think that might be all I recall.
Yes,
there were some portents. I didn't have a lot of evidence, but I think I had some things that suggested that, we had a dangerous time. There was some reading of some portents. One of the people from Veii revealed the nature of the portent to the Romans, which then prompted the Romans to take some action to make sure the portent worked out in their favour.
You are more correct than you know, Dr. G. So we're right in the middle of this lengthy siege of Veii, a rival Etruscan city to Rome that, even though we've got this very epic story, is actually not that far away from Rome. But we understand why the Romans want to conquer it. It's powerful. It's on their doorstep. It's from a rival peoples. They want it for their own.
Too close to home.
Yeah, and it's been dragging on for a while. It's been causing internal tension in Rome over issues like military pay and military service. So the quicker this is wrapped up, the better. And last episode, we did indeed have a man from Veii, potentially an older man, a soothsayer of some kind, being kidnapped. And he revealed that the only way Rome was going to be able to conquer the city of Veii was if they figured out how to deal with the excessive water in this particular lake that you mentioned.
Now intriguing. Now, I have to say, one of our Patreon supporters got in touch with us about this to discuss the way that there is some evidence from a volcanology perspective.
That's right.
For the flooding of these kinds of volcanic lakes from volcanic activity that happens below them that then pushes the water up above the line that it usually sits at. So if you've got a lot of magma moving around under the surface, all of a sudden you might get a situation which appears preternatural but is actually the result of volcanic activity. And I loved the fact that they reached out with this detail because I am not a volcanologist. I am an ancient historian. I was just baffled by this lake.
What are you bringing to the show if not volcanology? Get out
Charm
of here.
And good looks. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that would make so much sense. And I agree with you. So glad that someone reached out with this detail because we are, of course, talking about the Alban Lake, which is seemingly not connected to Veii, which is in completely the other direction. However, Signs come from whence signs come, Dr. G. When the gods choose to speak, it may not be geographically appropriate. And that makes sense because the Alban Mons was an active volcano up until around 1150 BCE, I believe, which might explain why there's not a lot of people living in this area until just after that. So that kind of makes sense. You know, the volcano stuff, it adds up.
It does. So I think that's an exciting detail that adds into this because you're like, okay, that sounds like a really bizarre story on the surface, but there could be some natural phenomena that is feeding into what is some very unusual natural observations that are happening from the side of Veii and the portents that are suggested as a result.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Patreon listener, for your volcanology tip. And with that, Dr. G, I think we might be ready to dive into 397 BCE. All right, Dr. G, 397 BCE, please tell me, who are we dealing with as magistrates this year?
Our players. The magistrates, we have a whole suite of military tribunes with consular power, and they're all patricians.
We're back in the saddle again for the ride through the town with the elites.
Yeah, look, you can have some successes in your siege under a plebeian leadership, but is that enough to keep them in power? No! The people who have always had power want it back, and they want it back yesterday.
Yeah.
So,
yesterday and forever, Dr. G.
Yeah, look. So, people we have in the role, we've got some names that are going to sound awfully familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of these people, by and large, have held positions before, or if not, they come from families that are going to be well known, well heard amongst listeners.
Sure.
So we have Lucius Julius Vulpisci-Ulus.
Yep, I definitely recognize that name, and I reckon certain 90% of the people are listening to this show.
You're like, a Julii in power? What are the chances? Previously a military tribune in 401, so really quite recently.
Mm-hmm.
Lucius Furius Medullinus.
Yeah,
a Furii, back in the saddle. Previously consul in 413 and 409, and previously military tribune in 407, 405, but most importantly, 398, just the previous year.
Methinks he's got a bit of a monopoly on power.
He certainly seems to hold a lot of positions,
He
so he
does.
seems to be quite popular. New kid on the block, but very familiar name, Lucius Sergius Fidenas.
Ah, yes. Descended, I presume, from a branch of a family that's had something to do with the conquest of Fidenae.
One would assume.
Yes.
Following up, also new to the role, Aulus Postumius Albinus Regilensis.
New man, but perhaps very familiar name.
Yeah, we're like, is that a new guy? Because that sounds like somebody we've talked about before.
I agree.
How many Postumii are there? A lot. We're then got Publius Cornelius Maguginensis.
Ugh, I hate that name.
Also first turn around the block. And then Aulus Manlius Vulso Capitolinus, who was also previously military tribune in 405 and 402.
Whew, okay.
I do have some mention that there are some legates or some ambassadors.
Indeed.
But apparently Livy talks about them, so I don't have their names.
Oh, well, okay, I have their names, so I can go through the little list and then we'll see how they come up in our story. We've got Gnaeus Cornelius Cossus. Now, we think that's his name, who's a patrician, previously military tribune with consular power in 406, 404, and 401. And then we've got Publius Licinius Calvus Esquilinus, previously military tribune in 400 BCE. We've then got Lucius Valerius Petitus, And he has been military tribune with consular power in 414, 406, 403, 401, and 398.
Somebody's popular at high school.
Yeah. Now that's one set. Or
yeah, there are more sets.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. There's a bit of confusion about, I think, these positions. So we may be dealing instead with Caius Valerius Potitus Volusus, consul in 410, military tribune in 415 and 404. Caeso Fabius Ambustus, military tribune with consular power in 410, 404, and 401. Or we might be dealing with a Numerius Fabius Ambustus.
Oh, okay. Now that we've hit the Ambusti in this list, I'm like, wait a minute. I had these people listed down for the previous year, but apparently maybe some of them are ongoing in their ambassadorial
Potentially, yeah.
roles.
I think there's a bit of there's definitely a bit of confusion happening around these ambassador legate people.
All right. Okay. They're still there, still hanging around.
They are listed in Broughton, and therefore I accept that they were there.
No, fair enough. So when we're talking about legates at this time period, it's basically a delegation. You could be given any kind of task. It's whatever the military tribunes or the Senate decide needs to be done. So it's not like they hold a specific military position. I mean, you do get military legates later, but you could be asked to do any task that's administrative in nature that is supportive of the Roman state.
Yeah.
So whatever that is, and I'm probably about to hear about it for the first time.
Well, I think the reason why there's a bit of overlap is that we, of course, had some legates legging it to see the oracle at Delphi in the previous year. I would maybe implying that maybe they're still traveling at this point in time. That might have something to do with it.
Well, you're telling me it's not that fast to travel all the way to Delphi? Okay.
It's a bit of a journey. All right, Dr. G, are you ready, therefore, to jump into 397 now that we kind of know who we're dealing with?
I'm excited to find out what happens, for sure.
Yeah, okay. So, we have a new enemy on the horizon for Rome in this year. The Tarquinenses.
Oh, dear.
Yes.
Are these the inhabitants of Tarquinii?
This is to do with the area of Tarquinii, yes. So we're talking about an Etruscan peoples. Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, they notice that Rome is dealing with a lot of other enemies at this point in time. So not only do they have the siege at Veii, which is ongoing, and Veii, of course, has by this time been joined by neighbouring peoples, the Falerii and people from Capenna. And then we've also got them fighting the Volsci, who were contesting occupation of Anxur. We've talked about that a few times. That's been tossed backwards and forwards between the Romans and the Volscians like a hot potato. And then we've also got the Aequians, who are engaged in attacking the Roman colony at Labici.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Romans have got enemies on every single side.
When don't they, Dr. G? When don't they?
But this is a particularly robust group of everybody that they've really ever encountered not having anything nice to say about them and deciding that attacking is worthwhile. So the Volsci and the Aequians sort of to the south and the southeast, the Faliscans, the Capenates, and the people of Veii to the north, and the Tarquinii also to the north. It's a pretty big sweep of war on two fronts.
It
and
is.
Multiple enemies on both fronts.
And just when you thought that Rome couldn't take any more, Dr. G, I'm going to add a smattering of internal problems.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. We're talking, of course, about the patricians and the plebeians.
Well, colour me surprised. What are they up to now?
Oh, well, you know, they always have these ongoing issues, don't they? I mean, we're in the conflict of the orders and we will be for quite some time now.
Oh, boy.
It couldn't be really more problematic in Rome right now. So the people who are the Tarquinenses are right on the money in saying that Rome has its hands full. Now, if I were being historical about this, Dr. G, I might want to point out that there are some eerie parallels between events from this year and another year which we haven't actually covered yet, which is 388 BCE.
Oh, okay. That's a very close year to have as a parallel, but I'll allow it.
Yeah. I think it's just that historians have definitely noticed that there are some interesting overlaps in that we also have war with the Tarquinii. We've also got Camillus showing up in that year. We've also got an attack on the Aequians. There's just some interesting crossovers there, which may or may not be coincidental.
This might explain why my evidence is such a mess, because there is some evidence that I have that I think goes with a later year, but could possibly be connected with this one. And I think for now, I'm just going to leave it until later, and whenever we get to the episode where I think it belongs. But yes, there was some confusion, even with the small amount of things I have available to me as evidence right now about where things go in terms of the timeline.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So basically the Tarquinenses, they decide they're going to just dabble in some raiding whilst Rome is too busy to really pay attention. They totally believe that the Romans are either going to just ignore the attacks as they didn't have the capacity to address it, or if they decided to deal with it, they wouldn't be sending their best men and therefore might be easily defeated or dealt with.
I see. Okay, so it's a raid of opportunity.
It is, definitely. Now, the Romans were not necessarily particularly worried by this raiding because, of course, come on, they're Rome. They're way too awesome to worry about such minor problems. However, it's the manners, the etiquette that is at stake here, Dr. G. It is an outrageous and unprovoked attack. How very dare you, is basically their response to these people.
How rude.
How
you didn't give
rude.
any warning.
Yes, exactly. It's just not the way that we do cricket.
Yeah, can't you see I'm busy with a whole bunch of other wars? You could at least send a letter to warn us we were about to do this.
Kind of as predicted, the Romans indeed did not put much effort into their preparation for dealing with this new and unexpected enemy. But they also didn't hesitate to deal with this situation. Aulus Postumius and Lucius Iulus, they weren't able to hold a regular levy because the tribunes of the plebs, unnamed, prevented one. So instead, they set out with a volunteer force, totally made up of anyone who had been talked into signing up. And they decided to travel through Carrhae and managed to surprise this new enemy as they were journeying home happily with their stolen booty in their backpacks.
Wow, okay. So I think the most impressive thing here is that there is anybody left in Rome who would volunteer to go on a party when they're in the middle of so many wars. And the reason why the tribune of the plebs are probably trying to prevent the levy is because the people, by and large, do not want to be levied anymore.
No. I agree with you. Who is left to levy?
Yeah. Who are these people?
Yeah.
Is it the young patricians who are like, it's time for me to show my masculinity out in the field?
Yeah. Is it children? Is it the elderly?
I don't know. Volunteers? Goodness me.
But, of course, because these people are totally beneath the Romans managed to kill a lot of them. I mean, it is a surprise attack, to be fair. And they managed to take back all the booty that had been stolen from them and headed back to Rome.
Wow. Okay. So on some level, I suppose this could just be read as a standard surprise attack. But I wonder if this is also something where Livy is now trying to build a narrative of Etruscan decline. Because
Interesting.
So the Tarquinii are one of the Etruscan peoples, and we know that Veii is not in a great situation. They haven't lost this siege yet, but watch out, everybody. Spoilers.
Yes, it could be definitely a bit of an indication of what is about to come. Spoilers. Yes. So the Romans then have a very amusing situation to me, which we've spoken of often, Dr. G, which is where they basically put everything out in the open and they say, come and get your stuff. You've got 2 days.
Oh, okay. So is this a booty situation?
Yeah, because they've taken back basically everything that had been taken in this initial attack has been taken back in the reverse surprise attack. And so they come home with all this stuff and stupidly, the Romans have not put their name on everything in black texture. And so they just put it all out and they say, right, you've got 2 days, everybody, and anything that's left on the third day is going to be sold under the spear, and the money raised will be split between the soldiers that served in this surprise attack. Selling something under the spear means a spear would sort of be set up as like an advertisement saying, come and get it, and it would be essentially a public auction.
Intriguing. Now, I wonder if there would ever be anything left. I feel like the onus would be the priority would be to take as much stuff as possible.
Exactly.
And particularly if you were involved in the raid, because what if there was nothing left at the end for that auction to raise money for yourself?
That would suck, yeah.
This does sound like a bizarre set of maneuvers.
But, there might be an odd shoe that doesn't have a pair.
And we're like, I see that leather vest, but I could make one better myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that rubbish home. Etruscan rubbish? No.
Well, so that's what happens. That's a little bit, obviously, of Roman success, which is just as well, because as for the rest of the Roman campaigns, it's not going that well, Dr. G. Now, don't get me wrong. The Romans are definitely not losing their other campaigns, but they're certainly not winning. It's basically a stalemate just all around.
Well, that's tough times, isn't it? Not making any progress, just sort of waiting it out, and it's the grind of war.
It is. So the Romans feel that they're stuck in this situation. They no longer feel that they're going to be getting any help from humans. We need to turn to the divine, Dr. G. And wouldn't you know it, it's right about now that those legates/ambassadors returned from the Delphic oracle.
Oh, good timing, guys.
Exactly. Now, they did have that soothsayer, the elderly soothsayer that had been kidnapped from Veii, who told them how to deal with the rising waters in the Alban Lake, and that unless they dealt with that, they would never triumph over Veii. But naturally, because he's from the enemy, they're a little bit suspicious that he might be trying to throw them off course, and they wanted verification. The Delphic oracle says exactly the same thing as the old man has said. So now they have corroboration. Of course, being an oracle, it says it in a much, much more wordy, oracle-y sort of way. But the meaning is essentially the same.
I suppose, yes. I mean, famously, these oracles could be misinterpreted, so I hope this one is clearer than most.
Well, interestingly, some historians, of course, have looked into this oracle, and it does apparently stem from something that has been translated from the Greek. And the prophecy is thought to be one that isn't really an original oracle from Delphi, but one of these ones that had sort of popped up in the late Republic and was reported to be an oracle from Delphi.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The way that it's worded, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with a bit of a sort of an anachronistic sort of retrojection back into this
period. At least in the wording, yeah. I mean, the meaning might have, always been there, but yes, the way that it's worded, I believe.
I think this is a really interesting move on the behalf of the Romans to be like, we need to put our faith in not any sort of soothsayer necessarily, or even local members of the Sibyllines, for instance, but we need to travel all the way to Delphi to get an answer. This might be indicative of just how under the pump the Romans feel in this moment with this ongoing siege, that they're like, we really need the big guns for this one. But it is an interesting sense in which we can understand Rome as being part of that broader Mediterranean world.
Sure.
They're not just relying on their own people. They're certainly not just relying on the Etruscans, and they're willing to travel quite vast distances in order to get some sort of divine insight into their local problems.
And now the Romans feel obliged to give the Delphic oracle a very generous gift once the war was entirely over. So that's their future intention.
Ah, yes. Okay, I look forward to this because I think I've read a little bit about this, but it doesn't happen this year, am I correct?
No, this is just an intention. They're like, mental note. Put it in the diary, guys. Once we finish dealing with this situation, we better send them something really nice. We'll get them a box of Lindt chocolates. We want top quality. We want foreign champagne, the whole works.
All right. So prepare yourselves for a hamper priestess of Apollo.
Oh, yeah. And given that we are currently recording this at around Christmas time, I feel like there's going to be all sorts of strange things in this hamper as well that you would never normally eat, but somehow turn up in hampers.
Yeah. You're like, oh, that's really intriguing.
Yeah. Some sort of pate, some sort of spread made of something that you never thought could be turned into a spread.
Oh, you're like, thank you.
Now, of course, all of a sudden, the guy that they had kidnapped from Veii, the soothsayer that had told them ages ago about this whole lake situation, is very respected in Roman society because, wouldn't you know it, he was telling the truth this whole time.
Can you imagine his fate if that he had not been corroborated by the Delphic oracle would have been death very quickly. So I'm glad for his sake that it's turned out well.
And I think this is where your version of events makes more sense than mine in this particular instance, because you highlighted that in your account, this guy was tortured for information, whereas in my account, he seems to very willingly just give information up. Either way, I definitely would have been suspicious. Torture means he might have just been saying it to make the pain stop. The other way around, it seems a little quick that he just suddenly turns against his own people and tells the Romans what they need to know.
Where's the sense of loyalty? What's in it for him?
Yes. The military tribunes Cornelius and Postumius want to use the soothsayer to take care of this whole Alban Lake overflowing situation, especially because now the gods are involved. They feel they have to appease the gods by taking care of that particular situation.
Sounds reasonable. All right, so they're going to get a workforce onto that one.
Now, they also find that there's been an offence against the gods because there was a problem with some of the magistrates.
Oh, dear.
Turns out that there had been a problem with the election.
Oh, okay.
It had been improperly proclaimed, these Latin games, and a sacrifice conducted on the Alban Mount. Now, this is probably referring to a Latin festival, that of Jupiter Latiaris. This is probably what it's referring to here, which was something that is associated with the Latin League. It was held every year, and after this festival, that's where there'd be a sacrifice, and there'd be the proclamation of new consuls or military tribunes at this time. So it seems that somewhere in here, at this very important moment of proclamation, something had gone wrong.
Okay. So I think this is one of those things about ancient Rome which is overlooked, particularly for the Republic, but is super important, which is the way in which their politics is very much tied in to their relationship with the gods at all times. So the way that things are pronounced, the way that things are said, all of those ritual formulations are extremely important in order to get right, for things to be proper in the eyes of the gods from a Roman perspective. So if something has gone wrong in any of that stuff and they come back around and they realize this is a huge problem. So does this mean that they disband this whole group of like military tribunes with consular
We're
power?
getting there. I'm just going to add something to what you just said. I think you're totally right about that, but I think it's also potentially a problem with the sacrifice. Like, it sounds like a great big stuff up on their part.
Uh-oh. A problem with the sacrifice. Do they have details about what went wrong with the sacrifice?
No. Just says there was a problem.
Interesting. A problem with the sacrifice.
Yes.
All right. I'm very intrigued by this.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah. Well, and I just thought I'd also mention, because people might not know much about this. Indeed, I don't know much about this because I'm not really into religion as much as you are. But this particular gathering, this festival, it's very ancient as far as we can tell. It goes back a really, really long way. It's held, funnily enough, on the Alban Mount, which we keep talking about, this previously volcanic mountain, which has now become such a focus of so many of our stories. And it is something where various Latin people come together. And it's where you can see this commonality between them in terms of the language that they speak, in terms of the gods that they worship, potentially also the way that their societies are organized. We've often questioned, do they have exactly the same political setup as the Romans? Because sometimes it seems like the Roman sources assume that they do. Maybe they do.
Maybe they do. There has got to be some sort of cultural connection, you would assume, even if things are run slightly differently in each place, that a shared language and a shared understanding of the gods that need to be looked after and appeased is a sense of commonality of purpose, even if there are small nuances of differences in how each one is run politically when they go back home.
Yeah.
Now, if we're talking about problems that you could have with a sacrifice, I mean, there's a whole number of problems potentially.
And this is a big one. Yeah, this is a bull that is sacrificed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it has to be the right kind of bull. So you would hope that that's not the mistake, that they've got the right kind of bull in terms of its coloration, for instance, and its age. Things like that are very important. But it could be something about the nature of the procession to the ritual killing. It could be something about how the knife was wielded during the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It could be something about what was said in the moment over the sacrifice, either before it happened or after it happened. So those verbalizations tend to be something that is really possible to make a mistake with and could be heavily scrutinized afterwards. Now, how would you know? You'd be waiting for other signs of the gods.
Right.
To suggest that there was some sort of displeasure here.
So
and then you'd have to backtrack. Yeah. The lake might be the indicator. Be like, oh no, it's the lake, guys. I don't think we did it right.
Yeah, and it is so interesting because, as you say, I feel like I often do overlook these religious aspects to Roman life. And obviously this is beyond Roman life. This is about Latin communal life where they're coming together, and it becomes a really important sign that you're invited to this, that you're part of that particular community. And it's something that the Romans will continue to attend for like a really long time. So it's probably not the only moment where we might mention this particular festival. Now, we don't know how far back this particular association goes exactly, even though we know the festival itself is very ancient. But it might be something to do with this myth idea that the Latins all trace their ancestry back to Latinus, the father-in-law of Aeneas, who's obviously very important in terms of Roman understanding of themselves and their connection to Trojan War survivors, who is transformed into the figure of Jupiter Latiaris after his death. Now, that may come after the festival as maybe a way of explaining some aspects of it, but certainly it does eventually have that particular association as well, which again highlights that shared culture.
Yeah, and as far as these sorts of things go, there's likely to be a number of different locations in different spots locally where gatherings happen, depending on the god, depending on the time of year. So shared sacred spaces, essentially, where people come together to meet in order to do this kind of ritual undertaking in order to make sure those relationships with the gods are solid. Now, I think what I would love to know, and I think might be impossible to really know, is how often might it be the case that the Romans are turning up to these sort of shared sacred spaces in order to engage in communal sharing of gods and sacrifice with people that they are also potentially at war with outside of those spaces. I wonder to what degree that is happening, or whether there are times where certain groups don't attend in anticipation of not wanting to run into groups that they're currently in conflict with.
It is an interesting question because as far as we can tell, the Romans did not initiate this festival. And it's something that they became a part of and became a perhaps more important part of as they start to conquer, surrounding cities and towns, and their reach grows larger. But yes, I agree. Awkward.
Awkward. Oh, hey guys, just here for the sacrifice.
Could you please pass the slaughtered bull?
That guy tried to stab me last year on the battlefield. Don't give him anything.
Now, as you highlighted, Dr. G, in this particular moment, the only thing that could be done to address this was to get all of the military tribunes to resign their office and to retake the auspices and start an interregnum in the place of the military tribunes because...
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it causes huge problems, obviously, for their power, the legality of that power. It's just not worth the risk.
Wow, it's been a while since I think we've had an interregnum.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm up for that. Sure. Let it commence.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's because they see all these signs, not just the lake, but obviously the fact that they're not having much success in battle. Like, it's not a disaster, but it's not what they aspire to. So the Senate orders that this takes place. The interreges who are chosen are Lucius Valerius, Quintus Servilius Fidinas, and Marcus Furius Camillus.
Oh, okay. Well, how convenient.
Yes. There are ongoing problems caused by these unnamed tribunes of the plebs who are continuing to cause issues. In this particular instance, they are blocking elections until they receive assurances that most of the new military tribunes with consular power would be plebeians.
Fair enough. I mean, it's a classic tribune of the plebs move. I applaud them for it, and I wish them all the very best.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is perhaps why they're unnamed, because Livy's just like, oh my God, here we go again.
Not more of this.
Segue to what's going on in the Etruscan land.
Ooh.
The Etruscans are also having a bit of a meeting at this moment in time. Now, we've often seen the Etruscans come together at Voltumna. It's where they all seem to meet, chat, and get on Veii's case.
What's happening down there this time, guys? You need help again? We're busy.
Yeah, so now that they've got the Capanates and the Faliscans involved in this whole shenanigan, they are strongly suggesting that all the Etruscans should band together to try and help end the siege against Veii, because they're obviously now committed, and they're like, come on, guys, come on. We know you hate Veii, but what about us? We're adorable. However, once again, the Etruscans say a big fat no to helping Veii, citing their old reason that Veii had never shown any interest in helping or caring for anyone else but themselves.
It is really interesting because, one, how would Livy know this? But also
Spies.
This idea that Etruria as a nation is starting to break down. Like, under what circumstances would you not try to look after one of your own? Veii is an Etruscan city. So the idea that the rest of the Etruscans are getting together and being like, no. And it's like, it's really rejecting somebody from your family at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Being like, you're on your own, whatever.
Yeah, no, I know. It's kind of bizarre because surely they can see that things aren't going terribly, but it's not good. The siege has been enduring for quite some time now.
And what does Etruria think is going to happen? If Veii falls, who do they think is next? It's like they haven't thought ahead the way the Faliscans and the Capanates have. They're like, no, we're a solid block. We'll be fine.
The Etruscans also have their own problems going on, which might also explain their reluctance to help the people of Veii. And that is that they're dealing with, and I quote my translation of Livy, a strange race, new settlers. Who are these people? No freaking idea. The Etruscans aren't actually engaged in warfare with them at this point in time, but it's clear that it's a prickly situation.
Right. Are these people, by any chance, from the north?
I know what you're thinking, and we can't really be sure. It doesn't seem quite right. It seems too early.
Intriguing.
Yeah, I'll just explain to the listeners. I believe Dr. G is asking if they are indeed Gauls.
Have the French arrived?
Sacre bleu!
Yeah. Everyone's like, I'm confused, but their cheese is delicious, so I'll let them stay for now.
Yeah, honestly not sure, but from what I've seen so far, I think the answer is probably no.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't know. Don't know.
I wonder if they're people from the other side of the Apennines then. There's sort of like the East Coast Italians coming over the way, being like, hello.
East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the Etruscans decide to make a bit of a compromise in this whole scenario, which is that any of their young men who want to go and volunteer may go and help Veii. Once again, volunteering, big thing, 397.
Nobody's got any money. That we've established.
That might be it.
They spent it all paying the soldiers to get through winter. Nobody's got any cash left, Etruscans included.
Yeah. With young people going to volunteer to help Veii, the Romans, of course, presumably don't know that all of this is going on, that this is a negotiation that's happening. And so all they see is this huge influx of young fighting men. And they're like, holy crap, what does this mean? Is this a sign that worse is to come? This seems very worrying. And of course, as soon as the external threat, that external pressure is increased, it means that the patrician and plebeian problems, they got to take a backseat. That predictable pattern that we've come to know and love, Dr. G.
Yes, we need to band together. Put aside our personal political differences and make sure we win this war. It's the only way. In fact, it is the only patrician way to navigate anything.
Yes. It's at this moment that we see a return of Publius Licinius Calvus. If that name doesn't ring a bell, for shame, because he was the first ever military tribune with consular power who was definitely, without doubt, a plebeian. And he first served in 400 BCE, so only a few years ago.
How could one forget? That's very exciting, but what is he going to do? Does this mean they've put him into a magistracy or...?
Yeah, he's chosen again to be prospective military tribune with consular power for the following year, I believe. That's what they want.
Okay.
And I think because they know that he's a very moderate character. Remember, if we cast our minds back to 400 BCE, it seems that he was chosen because whilst he has the plebeian background that would please the tribunes of the plebs and the plebs themselves, he was not offensively radical to the patricians.
Very willing to roll patrician style.
Yes, and because he had proved himself before, I think they see this as a compromise moment once again.
All right, very interesting.
Now, I'm going to add another detail that's going to blow your mind here.
Okay, I'm ready.
He was chosen even though he had not run for the office.
Ooh. Okay. Well, that's sounding more classic Roman potential Virtus moment, being like, I'm just hanging around being a dude. And it's like, we need you to save Rome.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think they see him as serving a very particular purpose at a moment of tension when they need the Roman people to be united. And the senators are very happy that he is around to serve this purpose. And I think the idea is they're going to get the whole band back together. That's what Livy says. He's like, let's just get everybody from 400 because that was a great team. We want that team. We need that team.
Wow. Okay. Well, I feel like that will be an interesting moment for them if that's the path they decide to tread for the next year. But I guess we'll find out soon.
We will. And I'm going to have to save, unfortunately, the details of exactly what happens for the following year because, of course, this is all for the following year. So this is looking forward to 396. The detail that I'll finish up on, and this is one I must admit that I always find confusing to explain because the Roman voting system is always one that perplexes me. Particularly early on in this stage where we can't be 100% sure about a lot of details. But the way that he was chosen was apparently by prerogatives. Now, explaining this is where I get a little tripped up. Essentially, the idea is that there are 18 centuries of knights, and they would vote first. And if they all vote the same way, the other centuries are not required to vote because they outnumber it. That's the whole idea of like the rich and the powerful outranking everybody else.
Yeah, there's a clear system of who gets to vote in what order. And then there's a first past the post kind of element to this, where it's like once they reach a threshold of who the winner is, everybody else can just go home.
Yes. The difference is that with the prerogativa, the idea is that one would be chosen by lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of the idea. Rather than them all voting together as a voting block, eventually there was a system introduced where one of the centuries would be chosen by lot, and it would be revealed to the rest of the assembly before a vote was recorded. So it was kind of being like, this is the way that we're heading kind of indication, I suppose.
Okay, and that selection by lot happens before the voting commences?
Yeah, it's this idea
Okay.
that one of the centuries, so presumably what we're talking about here is like the Comitia Centuriata, and it's like one of the centuries from the first class would be chosen by lot, and that would be like an indication of where things were going. Eventually, it was, I believe, adapted so that a single century would be chosen by lot to try and make it a bit fairer. Now, all of these developments that I'm talking about here, they're all things that we can only attest for certain at a much later date. We have no
I was gonna
idea
say.
when these things actually really started.
Yeah, the voting organization is very unclear from our source material for this particular period. And I think we only start to get some really solid evidence, some hints and tips in a century or two.
Yes, exactly. So exactly what this means is a little unclear, but it certainly, I think, is meant to be indicating that, look, well, this is the way that the vote would go. And we like this guy. We want Publius Licinius Calvus to be our man.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, so it's a little confusing. I apologize that I've explained this badly, but it's mostly because it's all about who has the right to vote first, essentially. And the reason why it's confusing is that it's really hard to know exactly how this would have played out at this particular moment in time.
For sure.
And that
All right.
is about all I have for 397 BCE, Dr. G.
Oh, well, exciting news. I have things to tell you about the broader Mediterranean world.
Love it.
Not a lot, but I don't have much on Rome, but I have made a note about this prerogative motion in voting systems because I'll go and have a look at it and see what I can dig up because I would
Excellent.
love to know more.
Yes, and I must admit, but the more I looked it up, the more I became incredibly confused because it's obviously been adapted several times, and none of those particular attested moments may have anything to do with this story.
Yeah, it's a tough one, particularly for this early period of the Republic. So, the source that I have for this period is Diodorus Siculus, amazing, who gets some of the names right of the military tribunes, some of the names wrong, leaves a couple out. But he does also tell us about what's going down with the Persians and the Athenians
Ooh, okay.
at this point in time. So we have this really interesting character called Conon. Now, Conon was a naval commander of the Athenians, and he gets voted in on multiple occasions as Strategos, so as a military commander general figure. And during the Peloponnesian War, he gets caught up with some situations around Mytilene and he loses a whole bunch of his ships. And this is a problem. And he escapes out of this situation and he flees to a king, Eurygoras, who's in Cyprus. So he gets to a different island, he gets himself out of trouble. And it's at that point that he's put in touch with a guy called Pharnabazus, who is a satrap of the Persians and is currently great king as well. So somehow he falls in with the Persians, the powerful Persians at this time. And he is then taken in by the Persians and placed as an admiral at the head of a Persian fleet because of his great skill set. So he's basically escaped from a warlike situation and sold his skill set to the Persians. The Persians have been willing to accept that, and he's now an Athenian leading a Persian naval command.
Treachery.
You're like, this is chaos. What is this guy up to?
I feel like that's not a terribly uncommon story for the Greeks at this moment in time. Even though the Persians are often like their great enemy, a lot of people who fall afoul of their fellow Greeks seem to find their way to Persia.
Yeah, and so it's in this sort of like situation where it's like he's fallen in with the Persians and they're looking after him and he's been put in charge of stuff that they then send him probably because of his intelligence. They send him at the head of a Persian fleet to Athens. So not only is he now working for the Persians, but he now is rocking up at the doorstep of his former homeland, entering the Piraeus with 80 triremes, and he's like, we're here to help. The Persians are here to help. Everyone's like, what? This situation is part of what is going on with this complexity of the Athenian situation, which has been variously strung out with the Peloponnesian War, which is just has wrapped up, but is now like, what are the consequences of that? And part of the consequences of that is that the Spartans are now seeing a power gap and opportunity. And so they see that this Konon character is at the head of this fleet. They try to make that a thing for them. And it's just getting really messy over there. He eventually gets lured back to Persia, and there he's arrested because he's not doing what the Persians want him to do. The Athenians don't seem to be particularly happy, and the Spartans are not very happy either. So it's a tale of woe and dissatisfaction that is playing out in Greece. So, I mean, good luck to the legates and ambassadors who have been trying to travel to the oracle at Delphi during this period. Because it seems like it's a complicated time in the Mediterranean Sea in terms of who's going where on what ship and how they're ending up and who's actually in charge. And how do you tell if somebody's Persian or Athenian when they're in command of a whole fleet of vessels? Nobody knows. It's madness out there.
Indeed. Oh, my goodness.
Well, that's my fun tale. I'm sadly lacking in source material for the Romans.
I suspect that will change for the next year.
I'm very excited for the next year because I have so many sources to consider.
Indeed. Well, I think that means, Dr. G, that it's probably time for the partial pick.
Rock.
A very tired little Igor today. So, Dr. G, tell us about the partial pick.
All right. We judge Rome by their own standards, and often they fail miserably. So we'll see how they do this time round. But there are 5 categories that we're going to consider, and they can win up to 10 golden eagles in each category. And at the end, we'll add it up to see what they got out of 50 and whether it's a pass or fail for the old Romans this time round.
I'm not holding my breath, I'm not going to lie, but let's start off with our first category.
First category is military clout.
All right, well, whilst widely acknowledged to be in a stalemate, they did have that little victory over those raiders.
I give them 1 point for that.
Oh, come on. They haven't lost anything disastrously. They're holding their own.
They've won nothing else.
But they're facing so many enemies.
Okay.
2?
I expect more victories.
But they're not losing. They're holding their own against several enemies and still manage to secure, okay, admittedly a minor victory against some raiders, but still, they got all their stuff back.
Okay. How well have the Romans acquitted themselves in battle is the question that is connected with the concept of military clout.
Well, they won against the raiders. They got all their stuff back and they gave it back to everybody.
Raiding is not a battle.
No, the enemies were raiding. The Romans put those raiders in their place. With volunteers, no less, Dr. G. Volunteers.
Willing to give them 1 golden eagle, nothing more.
All right, fine.
Nothing less. The second category is diplomacy.
No, I don't think so.
I sense no negotiation.
Well, I feel like the Etruscans are negotiating amongst themselves, but that doesn't count for the Romans.
It certainly does not.
No.
Expansion?
No. I mean, they're kind of just holding on desperately.
Holding on. Okay. Virtus.
Oh my God, no. There's like nothing going on here.
I don't know. I felt like there was a virtus moment when Calvus didn't put himself forward.
Is that virtus though? Isn't virtus about taking action?
I mean, yes, but it would also potentially, if we had a scene where he actively declined.
Well, I don't think that's what happened. I think, look, I don't want to give anything away about the following year, but it seems more that he was just minding his own business, racing around, trying to manage the folds of his toga. And he was chosen because he demonstrated that moderate behavior, which they felt Rome was sorely lacking at this point in time. And he doesn't seem to have said no exactly.
Okay, well, he's coming across as a pretty bland character.
I think he is very bland, yes.
Doesn't say no, just goes with the flow.
Yeah, I mean, look, there will come a moment which is going to complicate this story in the following year, but I don't think he is like a Cincinnatus type of character where he's like, ugh, you just leave me alone to farm.
Well, in that case, I'm not seeing any clear signs of Virtuous on display.
No. I mean, look, there's the dealing with the raiders, the military tribunes with consular power. They do that. They deal with the Alban Lake situation, but I feel that's just politicking.
That is. I'm not necessarily seeing any standout figures of Roman Virtuous here.
No.
All right, the final category. Perhaps the moment for redemption, because otherwise it's looking pretty grim, is the citizen score.
Oh, boy. Okay. We don't get a lot of insight in this year into what's going on with the citizens, apart from the fact that there is this ongoing tension between the patricians and the plebeians. And again, it's a very stalematey situation. While it doesn't seem to be going that brilliantly for them, the tribunes of the plebs are definitely holding their own, unnamed as they are.
They are. They seem to have denied a levy. But we also have citizens who are volunteering to go on some counter raids.
That's true, but from where? Are they the ones that had their stuff stolen?
Well, maybe.
Give me back my blanket!
I want my shoes, damn it!
How am I supposed to walk anywhere?
They say walk a mile in his shoes and you'll understand him. How am I supposed to understand myself without shoes? Yeah, so anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's very confusing. We do have the military tribunes refusing a levy. We have them postponing elections until they get certain assurances, which seem to have been somewhat successful because of this Licinius Calvus person being resurrected. Again, vanilla as he is a plebeian vanilla bean.
Well, I mean, if you have to have vanilla beans, let them be plebeian.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of success there, but there is still a lot of war going on.
Yes. So as a citizen, it doesn't seem like it's the worst time, because it's not like that Rome is having terrible losses on the battlefield where you could be like, it's a horrible time to be a Roman citizen.
True.
They don't seem to be winning a lot either.
No.
Except for the misplaced booty situation. So maybe a 2?
Yeah, I think that is fair. I think we also need to rewrite that famous line from Charles Dickens. It wasn't quite the worst of times. It wasn't quite the best of times.
397. Mediocre at best.
Yeah, and that means, Dr. G, that we have a total of 3 out of 50 golden eagles for Rome.
Well, that's quite low, Rome, but maybe next year will be redemption.
I know, it's one of those things because I'm like, actually, this was an interesting year in some ways, but it just wasn't really going anywhere. It was like the holding pattern. Look, this once again could be Livy padding the narrative a little bit until we get to the very big year of 396. He's in a holding pattern. He's circling a very big story, not ready to come into land yet.
Yeah, he's like a little vulture just waiting for the 10 years to be up so he can start telling this tale about the siege.
He's an eagle.
Either way.
Yeah. All right, Dr. G. Well, that is 397 wrapped up, and I am extremely excited to talk to you about 396 because I have indicated a number of times, as have you, it's going to be a big one.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Partial Historians. You can find our sources, sound credits, and an automated transcript in our show notes. Our music is by Bettina Joy de Guzman. You too can support our show and help us to produce more fascinating content about the ancient world by becoming a Patreon or buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. In return, you receive exclusive early access to our special episodes. Today, we would like to say salve to Taurus, Vicky, the Mercian People's Front, and Gail, some of our recent Patreon and Ko-Fi supporters. Thank you so much for joining the Partial Band. However, if you lost all of your money betting on the wrong gladiator, please just tell someone about the show or give us a 5-star review. And if you're looking for something delightful and Roman to read over your holiday break, you can grab yourself a copy of our latest book, Your Cheeky Guide to the Roman Empire, out now. Until next time, we are yours in ancient Rome.